Be Hero presents Sheroes.
Hello everyone, Alicia here.
And Amy.
Welcome to our first episode of Sheroes.
We're super excited to bring you our podcast this week, and we're asking the so-called heroes to step aside for a moment so that we can give the Sheroes their turn in the spotlight.
Yes, you heard right. Welcome to Sheroes, a podcast by Be Hero Media.
Just sit back and relax. It's time for the real game changers to show you how it's done.
All right, well, we are super excited this week to tell you about a group of women climbers. Amy, would you like to tell us a bit about them?
Sure, I'd love to. In the year 1978, there was a group of women climbers who made the ascent of Annapurna 1, one of the peaks in Nepal.
It is one of the 20th largest peaks in the world and is one of the most dangerous mountains in the world.
As was mentioned, this was a ascent of Annapurna, and it was the first all-women's climb of Annapurna, with the exception of some male Sherpas. It was also the first American ascent.
And to clarify, they were not all American. One of them was from Britain, and a couple others were born outside the U.S. However, they did have citizenship in the U.S.
That's right. So in all, there were 13 women that were, I would say, the main team of women. 11 of them were climbers, and 2 were the film crew.
All right, so I want to tell you a little bit about the leader. She is Arlene Blum. She was 33, a mountaineer, writer, and an environmental health scientist. Her role, as she saw it, was efficient logistical scheming and ensure that it was carried out by the team.
One of the women who actually made the final ascent was Vera Komarkova. She was from Czechoslovakia, moved to the U.S. She has a PhD in high-altitude plant ecology. And during the time of the ascent, she was 35 years old. She was responsible for some of the trip cameras and two-way radios. I did want to note one thing that was pretty cool about her is during one of the Olympics prior to their ascent, she, along with several others, had hiked or walked all the way from, I want to say it was from Mexico to the Olympics. So it was pretty cool, pretty fascinating, and pretty awesome.
And considering that she studied high-altitude plant ecology, she was very much in her element on this climb. She, got everybody else really enthusiastic about it, especially Arlene Blum.
Another one of the climbers, and just to let you know, we're going to go ahead and kind of mention each of the climbers and then go into a little bit more about the story of the actual climb. So another one of the climbers was Vera Watson. She is pretty awesome as well. She was born in China. She was the first woman ever to make a solo climb of Aconcagua in Argentina, which is the tallest mountain in the Western Hemisphere. One thing that was kind of cool about that is she was on a trip with a bunch of men, and they just weren't up for it to hike to the top, which is why that was her first solo ascent. She was also a computer program and worked on System R, which was the first implementation of SQL. She organized a group of volunteers to fundraise for the climb, and her job on the climb was low-altitude food.
She actually ended up dying on this climb.
We'll discuss that more in a little bit.
All right, so we also have Irene Miller. She had a PhD in physics, and she was actually the fourth woman from Stanford to earn a PhD. She was the only mother with children still at home while on the climb, and she is 42 years old. Her job, or her role in this team, was to direct and take care of the porters and the money.
One other thing that's kind of fun is she was a cellist, and in high school, I also played the cello, so I think that's kind of a fun little connection with her.
And then one other cool, interesting thing about her is she actually paid for the education of 2 of the porters after the climb.
That's pretty cool. I'd forgotten that, so thanks for sharing. Then there's Piro Kramar. She was the ophthalmologist. She was the expedition doctor. At the time of the climb, she was 40 years old. Her responsibilities on the expedition was oxygen and medical supplies.
She was practicing Hungarian on this trip, so there's not a lot of details, but I like to think she was a language enthusiast.
I would agree with that as well. She also plays the violin, which is kind of another cool thing.
Which I also play the violin.
So it's kind of cool when you can make those connections with them. Another thing is that she kind of was one of the jokers on the climb. During the climb, there would be times where it would just be like really hard, or there'd be a lot of boredom or whatever, and so she would tell jokes.
Now we're going to talk about Annie Whitehouse. She was 21 at the time of the climb. She was a nursing student. Now, she may have been an artist. I'm not really sure. She did do some doodling on the trip. Her role on the trip was trip packing and shipping and taking care of the food.
One more thing I would add to that is I believe she was also assisting in the camp medical, just taking care of the medical stuff as well. Then there's Joan Fiery. She was during the trip, she was 49, although if I remember correctly, she celebrated her 50th birthday on the trip. She is also an artist and physical therapist. One of her responsibilities on the trip was with the food. A couple kind of fun things about her is, although she does love climbing, her passion is really art. Her climbing helps inspire her art. And then one other thing that's kind of interesting and fun is that her daughter, Carla, has the distinction of being on the summit of, I'm not sure how to say this, Sahali Mountain at 4 months old.
That's pretty crazy. So we actually have a few artists on this trip. I'm going to talk about Alison Chadwick next. She was 36 at the time of the climb, and she was actually an artist in Leeds, which I'm not super familiar with where that is. I think it's in Britain. She's from Britain, which is why I'm assuming that Leeds is in Britain. She climbed higher than the rest of the team prior to the climb, so she was the most experienced with higher climbs. She is also a lithography lecturer.
So we were going to give you the definition for that. I'm not prepared to give that to you. As I understand it, it's a form of printing. We'll probably in the comments or something give you details on what that actually is.
Yeah. So her role on this trip was climbing equipment. There were several people who had that role. She was one of them. And she also died on Annapurna.
That's right. A couple other things that were kind of interesting about her is she was definitely very enthusiastic and wanting this to be an all-women's climb, just the women to make the ascent. She wanted to prove that we truly are capable of it. It was also kind of cool to read how, despite being such a fierce and powerful woman, she had a gentle nature and was very good playing with the children as they were preparing and on their way to base camp.
All right, so next we're going to talk about Elizabeth Klubusky. Not sure if I said that right. She was one of the strongest, most experienced ice climbers on the team, and she was unwilling to risk her life unnecessarily, nor her teaching job.
So I think that's actually just one thing I just want to take note of for a minute here is that's actually really awesome. You know, that was her priorities, which I think deserves to be celebrated. In addition to that, she was born in Hungary, escaped to Austria, then to the US. She went to school for biology and German studies and helped develop computer-assisted language learning.
Her role on this trip was trip climbing equipment.
That's right. And then we have Margie. Looks like we didn't put her last name here.
Rushmore. I caught that later.
Okay. So she was the youngest one on the team. She was 20 and she was a geology student at the time. In preparation for the trip, she and the other younger team member, they actually both had to put their studies on hold in order to help with preparations.
And actually, she and the other youngin, they went to a high school together where mountaineering, I believe, was a course they could take.
I don't know if it was a course, but she actually joked that she majored in mountaineering in high school. So I'm not sure if it actually was a course or if she was just joking.
Or maybe it was a club in the school.
Maybe.
All right, so she had a couple roles for this trip, packing and shipping, and she also was helping with climbing equipment. And she actually became a geology professor after the climbing and graduation and all that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that she was a geology professor after she graduated. So next up, we have the two videographers. They were Diana Taylor and Marie Ashton. Although neither of them were professional climbers, they both climbed to Camp 2.
They both actually spent months preparing for this, learning how to climb, taking classes in preparation for this job. Diana Taylor, she's actually still making movies today. She helped with Mulan, which the one from 2020.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I didn't know that.
And she also worked on McFarland. Those are probably the two that you might have heard of. I'm certain that most, if not all of us, have heard of Mulan. And then obviously she worked on this project that we're telling you about now. Marie Ashton, she made films for the National Organization for Women, and she actually went back to school and got a PhD in clinical psychology. I couldn't find a lot of information about her, so I'm not sure, maybe simply because she's not making movies anymore that she's just not as well known. It could be why I could not find very much information about her.
Yeah, that's possible. So they did actually produce the film for this, and it was aired, I don't remember, was it on ABC?
I didn't catch where it was aired.
Okay, but yeah, and so we actually purchased the video, but we haven't seen it yet because it's still in the mail.
All right, so there's actually one more woman who was a part of this team. She was not a climber, but her name is Christy Tews, and she was the base camp manager. She just managed the base camp. I don't think she went any higher. It's possible she went to Camp 1.
Yeah, I don't believe she went past base camp. She wasn't a professional climber, but she was very excited about the project and was instrumental in its success.
She was also very disappointed that she did not have the climbing experience to go higher, and she expressed sadness about not being able to go higher. She is actually 38. She was 38 at the time of the climb.
We wanted to kind of discuss about the actual climb to Annapurna. There was the base camp, plus you could say 5.5 additional campsites. After Camp 3, they had 3A. I could be remembering wrong. It might have been right before 3 that they had 3A, just because for whatever reason they weren't able to make it to Camp 4 in time. So some of the things that I found very interesting about the experience was they had to carry pretty heavy loads, which I can't even imagine what that would be like. To me, it actually sounds pretty painful. And perhaps it was. It was also very challenging in a lot of different ways. There were avalanches happening regularly. There were several times where they would have to dig out their camps because they had been basically snowed in.
And on top of that, they also had issues with budgeting the money because they budgeted what they believed was the perfect amount. And then when they got there, they had little things come up that they didn't necessarily anticipate before the trip. The Sherpa, maybe it was the porters, saying that they needed more money and that Americans are very rich and can pay. And they didn't plan for that because they weren't expecting it. So that was another thing that was a challenge for them.
As they went through this experience, there were some occasional struggles with some of the decisions that were made. And ultimately, even though I'm sure it was a painful process, the leader, it was Arlene Bloom, she was able to learn from the experience about how best, to work with such experienced professional climbers throughout the rest of the trip. So although it was difficult, it helped her to become a better leader and also kind of helped them to have unity to go through that process.
One thing that was very interesting is that, you have this group of technically 14 women, one base camp manager, two camera videographers, whatever word you want to use there, and then the 11, main team. In their own way, each of them was cut out to be a leader. And so it was kind of difficult for her because the team, they actually had a meeting. They said, we want a strong leader. And, there were a couple people who were like, I don't think that you are a good leader. But when they came down to talk about it and they all voted, the majority of the people wanted Arlene Blum to stay the leader, but they also wanted to be involved in the decision making, which can be a little bit hard as a leader, if you have a plan and then other people are like, I don't think that's a good plan. Let me give you my suggestion, So that was, one of the challenges that she had as a leader is learning how to work with these women who are all leaders in their own right and how to lead this group. I think it's pretty amazing that she did that and that they all came out, friends in the end.
And there was a few other things that they kind of had to decide on as they went through, which they were big decision points for them, was whether or not they should use oxygen to get to the top, as well as whether or not they should use Sherpas to get to the top. And there was a lot of belief about both ways. The main reason for having the Sherpas and the oxygen was for safety concerns. And then the reason for not having them was because, they felt that they could do it and that it was a women's climb and they had something to prove. Ultimately, they made the decision to use both oxygen and the Sherpas to get to the top, which I think, it turned out to be it was a great experience for them. I don't really know how it worked, but from their camp, I believe it was from Camp 2, the videographers were able to, with their special lenses, were able to film them reaching the top, which I believe was around 3 p.m.
Yeah, I didn't catch the time of day, so...
Let's see. I think there was a couple more things I wanted to mention. Let me think about this. I think we mentioned this earlier, but the two women who made it to the top were Vera Komarkova and Irene Miller.
And the two Sherpas. I don't know if I'm going to say this right. I'm going to do my best. Mingya Tring and Ringjin. I'm not sure if I got the last name right. Possibly Shipa?
After they finished theirs, we had Allison Chadwick and Vera Watson. They wanted a chance to attempt the summit as well, although they actually decided that they wanted to attempt one of the other summits that had never been done before. The leader, Arlene Blum, she had agonized for a long time about whether or not she should let them go and whether or not she should let them go without Sherpas and oxygen. And ultimately, she allowed them to make the decision to go attempt the ascent.
It might have said in the book, but I don't recall if it says if they made it to the top or not, or if we just don't know. But we do know that they never made it back to camp.
Yeah, after a few days of waiting for them and not hearing from them, they sent up the Sherpas to go see if they could find them. And they actually did find them pretty quickly. I believe they found them close to Camp 3. It could have been Camp 5, but I think it was Camp 3. And from what they saw, it was clear that they had fallen from a significantly higher cliff or something. As far as how they died, it's hard to say exactly, but most likely they died instantaneously because they weren't anywhere near each other when they were found. They were pretty far away. And they figured that if either of them had survived, they would have been, trying to reach the other one. That portion was devastating, I think. But I think even though it was devastating, I don't think that, ultimately the mountain is a powerful thing. I don't think they did anything wrong. I think ultimately it was simply that you can't control the mountain. But perhaps somebody who is an experienced climber might agree or disagree with our assumption on that. Seeing as how I'm not a climber, I could be completely wrong on this.
We do have the opinion that they probably reached the top. I don't think, like I said earlier, I don't think it says in the book, because I don't think anyone knows.
Yeah, there's no evidence one way or another, so
but we want to believe.
We're choosing to believe that they accomplished what they set out to do.
All right, so I did have a couple quotes that I just really loved from this book, and I don't think we've mentioned the name of it yet. It's called Annapurna, A Woman's Place. So this one right here, I really loved it. It just says, when people ask me why I climb, I frequently tell them that climbing gives me a chance to be with people without artifice or distraction, to know both my companions and myself better.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I don't really have anything else to say about it.
I mean, I feel like, that's kind of the same reason I dance. Like, when you're really passionate about something, I think it helps you with, she says, a chance to be with people without artifice or distraction. And that's kind of how I feel when I dance. All right, I did have one more quote that I really liked. So this was kind of towards the end of the book, and it's just kind of explaining about, well, I'll just read it to you. So it says, until there are confident women leaders, women will have to depend on men to invite them on expeditions, and this, unfortunately, is rare. I don't know if this is still the case as far as climbing goes, because this particular climb happened a long time ago, and we're not really part of the climbing community. However, I do know that there's still not as many women leaders in the world as I think we would all like to see. There's, we have all these movements to try to get women more in the spotlight. And so I think this rings true, not just for expeditions, but just the world in general, that we need more confident women leaders.
So the reason why we thought this was a good one a good team to share with you all is because of their drive to break the barriers of what women could do. From what we found in learning about them, each of them were pioneers in climbing as well as their fields and hobbies. We hope you enjoyed our show.
And to women and girls the world over,
Be
brave.